Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective. In today's installment of the Retrospective, we shall be continuing the series' fourth two-parter in episode 53, Snack Attack Part 2, or as it's known in the Japanese original, Demonic Chocolate Capsules Part 2. So before we begin, I want to just clarify that this is a review of part 2 of a two-parter special episode, as opposed to the second part of a single episode review. Speaking of that, I highly recommend you watch my review of part 1, because it will provide some more context to the events of this episode and its review, and I think you'll just in general enjoy it, as well as enjoy this video more if you watch that first. With that being said, much like all my previous reviews, I will be reviewing this episode for the most part as its own episode, but at the end of this video, I will be discussing the two-parter as a whole and my general thoughts on it and how well it connects. But yeah. This episode was originally released in Japan on October 19th, 2002 as the 53rd episode, whereas the English dub, done by the notorious 4Kids, was released on September 13th, 2003 as the 46th episode. This change in release dates was likely due to the rearrangement of some other episodes as opposed to anything wrong with this episode in and of itself. Luckily, it seems 4Kids had the basic competency to release it after part 1, so at least it's not completely messed up. But enough of this pre-review episode information / context. Let us start reviewing the episode proper. The episode opens to a little narration. It is here that we see the first change between versions. In the Japanese original, this narration is done by Tiff, while in the 4Kids English dub, it's done by an unnamed and uncredited narrator voice actor. Honestly, both do a perfectly fine job recapping what happened last episode and catching people up who are watching this. And we see clips of all the top moments. While I honestly do prefer someone in-universe like Tiff doing these sorts of narrations, it's honestly not a significant change and it doesn't really matter. It is a shame, though, that the guy went uncredited when, let's be frank here, it would have been so easy to credit him in the credits, but I guess 4Kids just wanted to save some money. After this episode recap, we then see the jazzy intro. After the jazzy intro, we then cut to a shot of the moon as we see the town under assault from the millions of minifigures. And we see them causing a lot of damage and just causing a great ruckus. First, in Chief Bookham's house, we see them acting up. We then cut to the museum as we see Professor Curio begging them to stop destroying all the priceless artifacts of Cappy history, which is to no avail as they just continue to do that. We see the figures pushing over lamps, breaking vases, going through windows, as we see Spikehead, Iroh, and Honey fighting back against these little menaces. The whole town tries to fight back. As in the Japanese original, there is an additional few scenes of the Cappies fighting as the camera pans. It's kind of a shame that it was removed because it really showed the chaos the town was in. I assume 4Kids likely did it to cut back on the total runtime, but I don't really know the exact reason. In both versions, we see Chief Bookums and his wife try to fight back. He says that they're so lively, while his wife chastises him for collecting so many of these annoying figures. We then see Kawasaki fighting off the figures, saying while he likes action, this is just too much. We see that the figures are actually quite fragile when it comes to demon beasts, evaporating into rainbow mist when getting hit by Iroh. But there are simply so many that this just means little. In the Japanese original, we then see a cutscene of the mayor and his wife fighting off some of the figures. 4Kids removed this for unknown reasons that have never been clarified, which is a shame because I think it only further highlighted all the mayhem that was going on in the town. So yeah, once again, just a strange decision. We then see Lady Like bashing some of the toys as we see Cerebrum say it's Tuff's fault for collecting all of these darn figures. Tuff says that he had no idea they would become monsters, but his sister calls him out, saying that she warned him that King Dedede was behind all these figures. Her father and mother are shocked as Cerebrum muses what the king might be up to. Then Tiff realizes that Kirby is in danger, and she and her brother leave to check up on the baby. We see Waddle Dees swatting the figures, and Tiff plus Tuff flee to help Kirby. While they do so, in the Japanese original, they pass Fololo and Falala, which are seen swatting at the figures. 4Kids, for some reason, again saw it fit to remove this short scene, despite it only aiding in the furthering of the status of chaos that is just going on here. Regardless, in both versions, Tiff and Tuff leave the castle to help Kirby, while Meta Knight watches them from above in a balcony. We then cut to Escargoon running to the king, complaining as we see the petty tyrant fights off the figures that he himself brought. Escargoon mocks his inability to control the monsters before one of the figures slaps him in the head and knocks him out. As King Dedede storms off to the throne room to explain to the enemy sales guy that the monsters are not listening to him, he complains to the sales guy, who then says he's got to be creative as they're, supposed to be modeled after toys. He then further explains that the monsters were designed to look like toys to play around. This intrigues King Dedede. Escargoon makes a snide joke before the king has an idea and laughs. We then cut to Kirby's house, where we hear him and the wretched bird Takori getting beaten up by the toys. Eventually, Kirby tries to escape by going up the chimney in what I can only assume is a reverse Santa movement. Takori petulantly tells him to hurry up, but in the end, he gets splashed out by one of the figures kicking Takori. They then land outside as we see that the entire population of Cappy Town is running to Kirby's house, chased by the horde of evil minifigures. Takori insults the entire crowd, but Kirby runs away before being stopped in his tracks by the king riding in his limousine. He asks him ironically if he wants some fun, and we see that there is an even larger crowd of those minifigures. Bookums complains that the king is the one who turned the figures into monsters. Professor Curio says it's why he was advertising the figures in the first place. The mayor points out that this is a massive dirty trick. Mabel exclaims that he's a figure fraud. The king laughs and gloats that he only succeeded because they sold him out, and that you can't tell a thief by their appearance. Tiff, in a rare instance, surprisingly says that the king was right, and that despite the evil plannings of the king, it only worked because of their blind, consumerist, greedy addictions. Tuff says that now they gotta stop them, with Tiff saying that if they work together, they can put a stop to the horde, and invigorated by her thoughtful speech, the Cappies all begin attacking back at the horde of these evil minifigures, though the king grins, seemingly unconcerned by their actions. We see Chief Bookums, his wife Buttercup, Tuff, Tiff, Mabel, Samo, Professor Kiro fighting the figures. Meanwhile, Kirby is chased around like a useless baby. Tuff says there's too many, but Tiff remains resolute, telling them that they gotta keep swatting. But soon the elderly mayor and his wife become tuckered out due to the sheer number of figures there are. Tiff begs them not to stop, and the king offers to solve this in another way, saying that he will call off his army of microfigures if Kirby accepts his challenge to a fighting match. He says that his fighting all-stars will fight Kirby to decide what happens as the camera fades to a large arena, built apparently by the King Dedede in a little under a day. I do want to point out that it does have a vague resemblance to the one from the arena in Kirby Superstar, but as far as I've researched, there is no actual connection. Also, in the Japanese original, when the arena is shown, we can hear an arrangement of the map of the Revenge of Meta Knight theme from, well, Revenge of Meta Knight subgame from Kirby Superstar. So that's kind of interesting. It's nice to hear a game reference, and it's quite frankly a shame that 4Kids saw fit to remove that. We see that the Colosseum, despite its size, is utterly packed. Doves fly through the air as we see Kirby walk slowly into the large arena. Tiff listens to all the people cheering. Interestingly, this sound effect of the Cappies cheering would be used in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, released for the Wii in 2007, showing how much of an influence this anime really had. Tuff points out how they have no idea that this whole thing was a trap set up by the king to destroy Kirby. Tiff laments on how all this is due to just wanting to help Gengu and Tuggle, as she feels a deep regret for doing so. We see Chef Kawasaki, Police Chief Bookums, Mayor Len Blustergas, the Cappy Kids, and their parents cheer on Kirby for his victory against the monsters. Tiff suggests that he could always forfeit the match, but Tuff says it would be out of character and he's not likely to do it. Escargoon, after Waddle Dee's blowing some horns, announces the fight between Kirby and the martial arts all-stars as the crowd cheers. Waddle Dee's play the drums and the 5 figures are revealed. They're in their toy form, which amuses Tuff as he wonders how they'll fight, but the king says they got skill, and one by one they activate and grow in size into real monsters. Let us discuss them now since, well, they're all introduced at this point. First, we see Kung Fu Lee. This green-skinned redhead not only wields a pair of nunchucks, but is named after the noted American martial artist and actor Bruce Lee, famous from such movies as Fist of Fury, and died in 1973 from an allergic reaction to some medicine that he took. The English dub, for whatever reason, decided to remove this reference, despite it arguably working far better in English than in Japan. We then see the heavyweight boxer known in the Japanese original as Boxer Dyson, which is a reference to the fighter known as Mike Tyson. Luckily, Kirby has no ears, so he's not going to get any bitten off. In the English dub, he's just called a heavyweight boxer. So lame. Why would they remove such an obvious reference that Americans are far more likely to understand than even the original Japanese audience? We then see old Takeyuku, who is a Tai Chi master that, frankly, doesn't have any reference to the name, but it has a neat design, so it still works. In the Japanese original, his back has a kanji on it, and 4Kids, for whatever reason, saw fit to airbrush it off. We then see the karate fighter, referred to in the Japanese original as the Karate Kid, which, yes, is a reference to the 1984 American martial arts drama film. This design is actually pretty good, though. He has these weird, meat glove hands. What's up with that? Somehow his hands look even worse than mine. And, well, as obviously indicated before, we see that 4Kids remove this reference, even though it works way better in English than in Japan, but whatever. And then we see the end of the group as we see the massive sumo Yankee Sekitori. This refers to the term Yankee, which is a phrase that refers to Americans, especially the northern ones. I must admit that I like the Elvis hairdo, but he does kind of look like a Billy the Fridge, which is weird. The five then approach Kirby menacingly. As the crowd cheers, Spikehead wonders how they grew so large. Ira says that they were cooler than the ones he had, and Professor Curio says those are the figures that they really wanted. Samo complains that the king was holding on to them, while Dr. Yabui bemoans that they never had a chance to collect those awesome figures, and to be fair, they are right. Those are far better than the other figures in the wave. We then cut to the King and Escargoon, who laugh at the adults for falling for their sinister marketing. Meta Knight, however, shows up and asks if the All-Stars plan on fighting fair. But the king assures him dismissively that his fighters are not cheaters, which causes Meta Knight to wander off and join the crowd in the stadium. Tiff tries to call up on him, and while he pauses for a moment, he continues walking away, leaving Tiff to ponder what is going on right now. King Dedede then stands up and begins the match as all five figures begin attacking Kirby at once. Yankee Sekotori does a sumo action and shoots Kirby with a golden beam, which Kirby just takes to the face. Karate Kid jumps into the air and, with his strange meat gloves, unleashes a teal-colored blast of energy that also hits Kirby, sending him flying. We then see Kung Fu Lee and Ulda Taikyoku double team Kirby, hitting him with an orange and red beam of energy, which Kirby luckily manages to dodge. Tiff points out how unfair this is given that he's being attacked by multiple people at once. The king laughs evilly as Boxer Dyson punches Kirby with a deep blue wave of energy, sending the poor baby flying as he's juggled by the other fighters. In an effort to end the problematic pink puffball, the five martial artists embrace diversity and attack him as one. Then, unprompted and in a case of quick thinking, Kirby tastes the rainbow, which astounds Meta Knight as Kirby inhales their attacks in order to become... Fighter Kirby. First seen back in Kirby Superstar, released in 1996 for the SNES. I have discussed this ability in 2 previous episodes, reviews that I highly suggest you go watch those videos if you want a more in-depth coverage of its history and how it transitioned into the anime. But to keep it short and not repeat myself too much, I would say that it made the transition into the anime well, which... to be fair, it's not that hard given how it's basically Kirby in a red bandana. Resuming with the plot, Tiff and Tuff cheer Kirby on while Blade Knight says that he finally stands a chance with fighter ability now. The king arrogantly dismisses this, saying that the real rounds are about to begin. Tiff and Tuff cheer him on, and after the commercial break, we see Escargoon announcing the first round between Kung Fu Lee and Kirby. The martial arts all-star starts by scratching his cheek. Kirby copies him, which annoys him for some reason, and he then proceeds to do these weird slow motions using his hands, which kind of confuse Kirby. And he then begins to hop back and forth before beginning to punch Kirby's lights out. I mean, seriously, man. And ooh boy, does he punch him a lot before kicking him a lot with roundhouse kicks after roundhouse kicks. Tiff and Tuff cheer for Kirby and he slowly regains his composure and then does a sliding attack. In the Japanese original, this is referred to as a leg sweep, which, while in the English dub, it's also called a slide kick. Honestly, it's a fine change, and both versions have their merits. I mean, the Japanese original is more in line with the games and what they called those attacks, but frankly, the English dub is just a better name overall for this attack, and I kind of wish the games would implement it. Another change between versions is seen in the Japanese original, in that the Japanese original, Kirby speaks out the names of his attacks that he uses throughout this episode, Four Kids removed this speaking completely, and frankly, that's an unqualified positive because, frankly, the less Kirby talks, the better, in my opinion. Kirby then does a smash punch at Kung Fu Lee, who manages to use his nunchucks to deflect these numerous attacks long enough for Kirby, of course being a baby, to eventually get tired. He then begins bashing Kirby's head in with the nunchucks, but seems to get a little too arrogant as Kirby, by pure chance, manages to roll over, probably with a concussion, and kick the nunchucks, which then proceed to wrap around the dude's arms. This gives Kirby a chance to launch a big attack, which then proceeds to vaporize the Bruce Lee wannabe into dust. Tiff and Tuff cheer them on while the king sends out the next fighter, showing off a boxing ring where Escargoon introduces Kirby, who is helped into the ring by Tiff, and then Boxer Dyson roaring into view. We see Tiff and Tuff helping Kirby prepare for the match. Tiff asks if he's ready, but Tuff says that it won't work as Kirby's arms are simply too short to work with the massive boxing gloves. While a humorous scene on its own right, interestingly, there was a plush produced by Little Buddy of Fighter Kirby that seems to be based entirely off this one scene, as it's the only time in the entire franchise that Fighter Kirby is ever seen wearing yellow gloves. The bell rings and Boxer Dyson charges Kirby and punches the heck out of him, eventually sending the baby flying into the air. As he's falling, he shoots an energy blast at Kirby, who manages to recover and dodge it, shooting his own blast, which then pushes him back long enough for Kirby to catch his breath and begin doing a lot of punches, which Boxer Dyson counters with his own, but Kirby proves too much, and through sheer number of punches begins to overwhelm the boxer. He's sent flinging into the ropes, which eventually causes him to fling right back at Kirby, which allows the baby to perform a rising break, basically uppercutting him into the air, where he explodes to death! Tiff, Tuff, and the others cheer him on while the king is still confident that he can recover as Escargoon proceeds to introduce the third antagonist round. This, of course, being Karate Kid. Standing on top of one of the columns, he jumps down and begins chopping the heck out of poor Kirby with his meaty gloves before kicking him into the air and eventually punching him straight into the stone column, much to the concern of Tiff. Kirby struggles to get up. Meta Knight walks over to them and says that this is good. Tiff is confused as Tuff points out that Kirby is close to losing to the mighty martial artist, but Meta Knight explains that in order to mature, Kirby must be pushed to his limits in order to grow past them and to mature as a star warrior. Karate Kid continues to slap Kirby with his meaty gloves. However, Kirby finally manages to block an attack. Karate Kid is shocked, but he tries to chop Kirby again. But much to his shock, Kirby gives him a grabbing hug, which not only shocks the master, but also impresses Meta Knight with his technique. He then throws Karate Kid away. He gets up and goes to try and attack Kirby again, but Kirby firmly grabs him and tosses him away. He ends up being flung right into where King Dedede and Escargoon are sitting. Frankly, out of all the defeats, this one always kind of confused me, because it's implied that Karate Kid died here, but if he hit these two with such velocity to disintegrate him, wouldn't he have killed the King and Escargoon too? I don't know, it seems odd. Escargoon emerges from the rubble to say the round goes to Kirby. Dedede, however, emerges from the rubble and says that they still got the Tai Chi master. We see old Taikiyoko slowly walk into the ring. He doesn't seem to attack right away, lifting his left foot, which Kirby innocently mimics. He then lifts his right foot, and Kirby does as well. And then he does it again, and eventually Kirby loses his footing due to his round body and rolls over, which Taikiyoko laughs at him for. Tiff warns Kirby that it's a trick to get him to lower his guard, which turns out to be true as old Taikyoko starts attacking Kirby with his feet. Kirby is eventually sent flying through the air by the Tai Chi master, but manages to use the momentum to do a drop kick straight on the guy's head. The old guy laughs a bit, but then dies of a concussion, exploding into dust. Meta Knight compliments the technique as Tough makes a pun. We then cut to the crowd where we see Chief Bookham saying the martial arts all-stars are hanging by a thread, with the mayor agreeing as Kawasaki cheers him on as there's just one last opponent. The crowd cheers and the figure monsters start to get a little nervous as they only have one last champion to possibly defeat Kirby with. The king, however, remains obstinate and sends out his sumo fighter. We see a crane lifting one of those weird Japanese roofing things as the sumo ring is revealed. Escargoon in traditional garments announces the match. The crowd cheers as Waddle Dees play drums, and we see Kirby and Yankee Sekitori entering into the area. Kirby starts off with that sumo movement. This confuses the crowd before Yankee does the same, but is so big that his actions causes the entire ring to shake. Kawasaki comments on how he's heavy duty. Bookham says that Kirby's too scrawny to match him, while Malin Blustergas says they should just watch the match and not worry too much. Kirby tosses a small bit of rice into the arena when Yankee does the same, but his hands are so large it buries Kirby in a pile of rice. Escargoon then explains that this match will determine who wins, and the two walk up to the line. Yankee then punches him, which causes him to get almost pushed out of the ring, but he manages to not get pushed out. He is seen flying right into the sumo's belly, and Yankee proceeds to use his fists to just beat the stuffing out of Kirby. Tough calls him out for cheating, with Tiff pointing out how sumo are not supposed to use their fists. However, Escargoon tells them to be quiet. Kirby tries to punch back, but the massive sumo just blocks it with his hand. He then slams his hands on Kirby, leaving the baby dazed. Tough says Kirby is going to get destroyed, while Tiff says the sumo is too big for him. However, Meta Knight remains unconcerned, saying every foe, no matter its size, has a weakness. Kirby runs from the brute for a moment before leaping at Yankee, and it is here that we see the final change between versions. In the Japanese original, Kirby claps his hand and vanishes, as a random image of a cat just appears. Meta Knight calls this a cat trick. Frankly, I have no idea what exactly it is a reference to, as even with all my research, I don't quite find anything that this is inspired. I gotta be honest, I can kind of understand why 4Kids decided to remove it, because frankly, it's just kind of random. Sadly, it does kind of have the side effect of making Yankee look extremely stupid, like he's like zoned out for a moment. Which seems to also impact Tiff and Tough, who ask what exactly is he doing, before Meta Knight explains that he's playing mind games. Just one of those weird changes that I think that 4Kids actually made a good decision to change. Kirby, running from behind, uses a slide kick to send him falling onto his back. Tiff and Tough cheer him on, but Escargoon snarks that he's not out yet. Yankee glows yellow and leaps up into the air to crush Kirby with his belly. But Kirby answers by uppercutting him with a rising break, sending him flying through the roof, up into the air, and exploding with a big boom! The Cappies cheer and flood into the arena, where we see them destroy all the little figure monsters. The king and Escargoon watch this annoyed. Escargoon bemoans how even when they cheat, they lose. The king doubles down, saying they ought to have cheated more, and demands a rematch. The people ignore him, however, as we see Sir Ibram giving Kirby a massive trophy for his victory. He struggles to hold it, and when he falls over, people laugh. We then cut to the king's throne room, where we see piles of empty boxes as the king seems to be looking for more martial arts figurines. Escogun complains that all they find are worthless trash like stickers. The enemy sales guy laughs, explaining that he tried to sell them more of the figures up front, but he pinched his pennies, and so is now stuck with all the junk. The king cries, saying he'll never collect anything again. As we cut to outside the throne room, we see Tiff, Tuff, and Kirby giggling at their ironic situation. Now that we have finished the episode's plot, let's discuss the episode's positives, negatives, and my final thoughts on the episode and my final thoughts on the two-parter as a whole. In terms of positives, this episode had a large amount of extremely well done action scenes of Fighter Kirby fighting against the martial arts all-stars as we see many different fighting techniques. In many ways, this is the anime's closest equivalent to the infamous trope known as the tournament arc, where, the main protagonist encounters a series of opponents in an arena-type context. I mean, there is a literal arena, which sees numerous opponents fighting Kirby. Speaking of those, the episode's antagonists are some of the best in the entire anime, frankly. Specifically, the martial arts all-stars. The figure monsters are, just kind of generic foot soldiers and are more impactful due to their sheer number than anything. But man, the all-stars each have an astounding design that leave quite the impact and frankly would work really well in the Kirby games themselves. I mean, they not only hit the simplicity of the game design, while also conveying the fighter method / technique that they each represent, as well as giving them all really good names that are frankly quite memorable. It is truly a shame that they have never appeared in the games, as I think they, alongside Knuckle Joe, would work amazing. Fighter Kirby was also extremely well utilized, perhaps even more so than its initial appearance, as it plays a far larger role in the plot than in previous episodes where it appeared. And this is achieved in several ways. Firstly, Kirby took the initiative and he inhaled the attacks on his own without Tiff's persuasion or prompting, which shows that he's only growing and maturing as a fighter. The way he managed to bring forth success against the great foes, differing levels of difficulty, also show that he's able to think on his feet. The King's devious plot was frankly well done, and I think it really led right into the thematic device of the episode, that being the dangers of the collecting, environment. And I really think that it was well implemented. In terms of negatives, there are a few. Some people have complained that King DDD going from attacking Kirby with all figures at once to doing it one at a time doesn't really make that much sense. Frankly, I don't really see that as a negative, as I think that it kind of feeds into the King's ego. But there are some minor changes / censorship done by 4Kids that, while minor, do negatively impact the final result, and I don't really like. That being the removal of some scenes and other such things that seemed kind of silly, like removing the kanji. But I will say, they did remove Kirby speaking and that cat trick, which were actually somewhat positive, so I won't give it too much flack in those regards, at least. Another thing some people complain about is that Tuggle and Gengu don't play nearly as big of a role in this episode. In fact, they're barely even in it compared to that of part 1. And I kind of have to agree with that. I'm going to talk more about that when I talk about the two-parter as a whole, but I do think they could have maybe played a little bit more of a role. Maybe be more in the crowds, cheering it on. I mean, we get a little bit of it where Tiff laments that this is all her fault, but that seems to be more related to her than to them. And, being part 2 of a two-parter, some of the jokes and points of the episode don't leave the same impact unless you've watched part 1, which, you kind of have to. Like Tiff lecturing the townsfolk on their collection mania only makes the most sense if you watch part 1 before part 2. Regardless, it's a good episode and worth a watch, and probably one of the best episodes in the entire series, quite frankly. But speaking of the first part, let's talk about this two-part as a whole. Frankly, I think it works amazingly. Both episodes not only work well independently and have their own sort of plots, they also manage to have an ongoing story that seems very well connected. Frankly, I think it's actually my second favorite of the two-parters in the entire series, only surpassed by one, which we will eventually get to, as I usually say. But I really do recommend this two-parter, as it's frankly amazing. Though, admittedly, I do think maybe Gangu and Tuggo could have been implemented a bit more in this episode, just to tie it even further with part one. Overall, this episode is a great one of the best in the series. I highly recommend you check it out, though I must say that if you think you are planning on watching this episode, you really need to watch part one beforehand to get the maximum enjoyment. Anyway, I am the Dark Master, and join me next time on the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective. And subscribe if you like the video, and have a nice day.